Well, actually, I'm not. I'm going to tell you things I want my children to know. And there's a reason I give this lesson this title. It's called the daddy list, or maybe the granddaddy list. And the reason I like doing this lesson, and I loved when we were setting the schedule for this last, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, the way this flowed, last time being family devotionals and this being this lesson. This is not meant to be a replacement for that lesson, obviously, but if you're looking for other ideas for family devotionals, you're about to get some. Because some of these are going to be things that you're going to want to take some of your family Bible time to specifically say, kids, Daddy's got some stuff he wants you to learn, or Daddy's got some stuff we need to work on. And it's going to be some very, very specific things. You may have heard the phrase daddy list before. The idea simply is this. What is it that I most want my children to know before they leave my home? One of these days, they're going to leave my home. One of mine has. I'm 8 or 9, 10 months, from that range from it being both of them. Now, they'll come back, for holidays, hopefully, and that kind of stuff. But as far as being under my roof, quote unquote, full time, we are really close to that being over. This list that I'm going to use as kind of just a guide, I wrote probably somewhere in the range of 11 to 12 years ago. It's changed. It's been expanded upon, but I keep the original list because I think it's interesting to go back, partially to see where my brain was 11, 12 years ago, and also to see, have I done it? Or have I even tried to teach some of these things? So the point of this lesson this afternoon is not meant to say, here's your list. It's meant to get your juices flowing. Here is what I had on my mind, and still do. All these things to me are still important. Some of them are very, very deeply biblical. Some are much more practical. But all of them are things that I try to look forward into the future. And so when my kids are 17, 18, 19 years old, however old they'll be when they go away to college or the military or whatever because at that time, who knows, what they're going to do, maybe they get married so they get through, I don't know. But whenever they are no longer, quote unquote, full time under my roof, what do I want to be able to look back and say, Daddy tried to teach them these things? Now, is there more than is on this list? Yes. Every one of us wants to teach our kids so many things. And every one of us, when our kids, as I know now, my daughter is grown, she's living elsewhere, etc. I think back and go, I forgot to teach her that as much as I should. That's going to happen. We get that. The list is almost infinite of things we want to teach or wish we had taught. But what are the most important things? This is my list. This is not meant to be your list. But you may want to write some of these down as a thing of like, either I agree, or something similar to that, or that triggers a thought of something else. My list when I started was 20. And the reason for that was this. I heard a guy speak on it, he said, write down 20. So I said, okay, I'll take that challenge. But I didn't sit down in 5 minutes. This was months. Not every day, obviously, but coming back to it, thinking about it. I think initially I wrote down about 7 or 8 that I knew immediately, like, yeah, of course. But then the more I thought about it, spent probably, I would guess, somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 months before I finally said, okay, now I've written down my 20. And as I said, I've added some things to it here or there, but I want to share with you these 20. Number 1, I want my children to know God, not just about God. Now, when they're little, I want them to know about God. I want to teach them that, He loves them. I want to teach them that He's, merciful, and maybe some words they don't quite understand fully yet, that sort of thing. And I want them to know that He created everything in 6 days, and et cetera, et cetera. In other words, when they're little, I want them to know the facts. But as they begin to get older, especially when they get into those tween and then teen years, I want them to be able somehow to translate that into, I want them to know Him. I want them to have a relationship with Him and feel close to Him. Frankly, as weird as this sounds, I want them to know that when they sin, they've hurt Him. That's part of that relationship. I want them to know Him, not just about Him. Remember in the book of Philippians, in fact, I was just teaching this to our teenage boys a couple of weeks ago. I've been teaching, this quarter, the elders have me teaching our teenage boys how to study the Bible, but they want me to use Philippians as kind of the guidebook. And we got to the phrase where Paul talked about Jesus, and he said, that I may know him. And we spent quite a bit of time in that class. We kind of, don't tell my elders, we kind of veered off of how to study the Bible for a few minutes, because we spent quite a bit of time talking about that Paul did not write that I may know about him, but that I may know him. And when it comes to a relationship with God, I want to teach my kids that this really is God's not just a bunch of facts. That's where it starts. But over the course of time, through family Bible time, through the fact we go to worship, through their own study, and we're going to get to, that's one of the things coming up in a few moments, I want them to know him. Number 2, I want my children to know the glory of the church. The glory of the church. That may sound really, really easy since I'm a preacher. Let me tell you, sometimes that makes it harder. Because my kids often see the negative side. Not necessarily because of me or because of my wife, but because of, quote unquote, the position I hold. Because daddy gets the complaints. Daddy gets, so-and-so, I can't believe, man, that song leader was, and they hear that stuff. Because people will do that with my kids sometimes standing right beside me. And they shouldn't do it anyway, but they especially shouldn't do it with a 9-year-old standing there, or even a 12-year-old or 13-year-old, or your kid was just baptized, and 2 weeks later somebody said how terrible the church is, right? But that's not just a preacher thing. I want them to see that the church is a glorious thing. I want them to know that, yeah, the people make mistakes. That includes daddy, that includes mommy. We're going to screw it up sometimes. But I want them to see how glorious the church really is. That Jesus died for this thing. That he loves it that much. And I want them to know that just because people might mess it up sometimes and say some dumb things sometimes and even sin sometimes, that takes nothing away from how glorious the church really is. That's one of those family Bible time things sometimes where you have some, I think this is a little bit older because you got some very serious discussions sometimes. Because as your kids get older, they're going to see some of that stuff themselves. They're going to be the ones going, man, our song leader's terrible. I mean, we sang "We're Marching to Zion" so slow this morning, I wasn't sure we were ever going to get there. Right? I mean, it's like, this is crazy. And man, one of the elders announced something. What? How dumb are they to make that? Whoa. Jesus died for this. And daddy may not agree with something the elder said. Or daddy may think that song was pretty terrible. That's terrible too. But that takes nothing away from how wonderful the church is. And so those, sometimes as your kids go over, those are going to be some really serious discussions. But I want them to see that the people aren't perfect, but the church is. Because it's the blood-bought institution of Jesus. Number 3. We've talked about this already this weekend, so I'll hurry through this one. I want my children to know that I love their mother more than I love them. I remember telling my kids that one time, and I literally remember the look on their faces. They were old enough, I thought they could understand, that God comes first, and then people come second, and that kind of stuff. And I remember looking at them and going, I love your mom more than I love you. I remember the look of kind of like, wait, what? It's like, wait, what? Now, quickly, that was followed with, I love you like crazy. You can't imagine how much I love you because you don't have kids yet. But you can't imagine how much more I love your mother. And that needs to come out in discussions. That needs to come out in how we act. That when mom says something, I'm going to back her up. Even if it means I have to discipline a child or tell a child no or take something away from a child because I love mama that much and mama's right. Mama loves God, and mama's trying to do what's right here. And they need to know, and we don't need to be like overly romantic in front of our kids. That can get a little gross, but they need to see that mom and dad still kiss. That's okay, right? It's okay to hold hands in front of your kids and kiss in front of your kids. Don't get all gooey about it. That's a little weird, but they need to see that we still love each other. And there have been times, especially as our kids got a little bit older, And they can begin to grasp those things because, they get to an age where, boys are cute and girls are cute instead of gross. And so they kind of get the whole thing of like, hey, we're supposed to like each other. That's part of it. But there have been times where we've told our kids that, we're going through this. This is a difficult time, but we love each other. Your mom and I are going nowhere. Nothing's going to break the two of us apart. They need to hear that nothing they do, nothing the world does, nothing, because I love her that much and she loves me that much. I want them to know that. Number 4, I want them to know the responsibility of wearing the name of Christ and my name. In that order. Christian comes first. The name of Christ comes first. That is an honor and a responsibility to wear that name. When I become a Christian, I'm putting His name on, and I need to make sure that wherever I go, whatever I do, I wear that name with honor. But I also want them to feel that same thing about our name, our family name. It means something. Now, our daughter, Lord willing, will get married one day and change her last name. That's part of it. I understand that. I'm not totally ready for it, but I understand it. And she's dating a guy right now that I kind of feel like maybe we're closer than we might want to be. She's only 19. Like, what in the world? But she's an adult. Okay. So it may be coming faster than I'm ready for. But when she gets married, I want him to wear his name with honor. And remember that she had a pretty good name before. But above that, I want her to wear the Christian. And I want them to see that those names aren't just flippant. It's not just something you just throw around. That I wear the name of Christ, and that means everything wherever I go. That's going to shade every decision I make. That's going to and the same is true of the last name. I don't want to do something that's going to use an old word, besmirch, the name, the reputation of who we are as a family, as extended family, etc. Number 5, I want my children to know that all people are created equal in the eyes of God. Doesn't mean there's not different roles. Doesn't mean there's not different talents. Obviously, doesn't mean there's not different ethnicities and languages, etc., etc., etc. But I do not want my children to look at anyone as lesser than they are. That's hard to teach in our culture. But I want my kids to look at everyone, wherever they might travel to, whatever talents somebody might have, whatever physical difficulties someone might have. I want them to know that every last person on this earth is their equal in the eyes of God. How do I teach them that? I treat everyone as equal. You can't just say this one. You need to say it, but they're going to notice if Daddy never talks to anyone who looks a little different than he does, or who has a weird accent to him, or he won't talk to people who have some kind of physical disability because that makes him uncomfortable. They're going to notice that. I'll tell you, this one was easy to teach our daughter. In fact, my daughter helped me do better at it. When our daughter was about 4, maybe 5, my last living grandparent was dying. And we were living about 3 hours away from where she was, so we came to see her. We knew her time was short, didn't know if it would be days or weeks or whatever. We knew we could come on this particular weekend, so we'll go. I don't say this to be funny or disrespectful. She looked a fright. She looked like a living corpse. She was thin anyway, had lost so much weight. Her face was already setting. My daughter walked right over to the bed, held her hand, and talked to her like I'm talking to you. I was uncomfortable. It was my own grandmother. And I thought, I need to make sure my son has that same mindset as he grows. And thankfully, I've done better about going to nursing homes, hospitals, and been in some situations, people who looked weird, looked disgusting, and everything else. But even beyond that, do I only talk to people who make as much money as I do, or as little as I do? Or do I talk to people who live in neighborhoods I'm not sure I want to visit? For whatever reason. They're way bigger than mine, or on the other side of the tracks, to use the old phrase. I want them to see and know that everyone is made equal in the eyes of God. Number 6. This one's very practical, but I love it. I want my children to know that clean humor is a gift from God. Life is really serious, but it's okay to laugh. And I want them to know you can be a Christian and you can have a good time. It needs to be clean. It needs to be within the realm of Scripture. We don't need to be making crass jokes and off-color jokes and sexual jokes and all that kind of stuff. But I want them to see that a good laugh on clean stuff, that's a gift from God. Humor helps the bones. Proverbs talks about that. And I want them to know that when they enjoy something, it really just brings them happiness. That's a good thing. Number 7. I want my children to know that marriage is a God-given and directed blessing. Marriage is a God-given and God-directed blessing. They need to know that marriage is not just some kind of social construct. It's not just something you do because you get to a certain age. It's also not just something you do because he's cute or she's cute. They need to know God put this in place. And because God put this in place, God gets to direct how it goes. That takes away all the social confusion about marriage, but it also talks about stuff we've talked about this entire weekend, about how to be a good husband, a good wife, a good father, a good mother, etc., etc. That God's going to direct what we do. That His Word is going to be our guide. Number 8, I want my children to know how to study the Bible. It's amazing to me that we will send kids to Bible classes at church from the time they're born till they graduate high school and never teach them how to study the book or tell them they need to know. You ever thought about this? We'll have a quarter-long class on Romans and a quarter-long class on the life of Abraham, and then a quarter-long class on a few of the favorite Psalms, and then maybe a quarter-long class on dating, and then maybe a quarter, etc., etc., etc. And never have we told them how to actually pick up the book and use it. I want my kids to be able to study the Bible, to know what it means to look at a passage and really think about it and see what's there, and think about things like context and who are they talking to, who are they writing to. And so some of our family devotionals have been just walking through some passages of Scripture and saying, okay, Daddy's not going to tell you what this says. We're going to figure it out. And we've worked through some things where they've seen, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, comfort. What are we talking about? Comfort, duh. That's what he talks, he's at 900 times in 3 verses or something. It's over and over and over. But they see that stuff, and they're never taught that. I shouldn't say never. Rarely is that used in a Bible. I'm glad, by the way, that's what I'm teaching on Wednesday nights to our guys. And our ladies, some of our ladies are teaching the girls too, the same thing. But I can't leave that up to the church. I want Daddy to be the one who's giving them some tools and some thinking abilities to how to study the Bible. Number 9, I want my children to know that prayer soothes their soul and their mind. That yes, I'm taking before God things that are of value to me, and yes, it's a commandment. I'm doing it because God said to do it, but I want them to know that when they pray, and they pray from the heart, they have that peace that passes all understanding. Philippians chapter 4. That it really does soothe their soul and soothe their mind. Doesn't mean they figure something out in a heartbeat and they need to be able to work through those things, but they need to know that you will be a more peaceful person if you pray. Number 10, I want my children to know the value of diligent work. Work is not a bad word, and I want them to know that work is a God-given gift. It provides value to you because it gives dignity to your life. It provides value to the people you serve, whether that's actually an occupation or just doing something for someone, serving someone. Maybe you go rake leaves at somebody's yard. I've seen a few leaves around here the last couple of days. It's almost like you have leaves falling up here. We do too. I'm scared when I get home because we live in the middle of like 9,000 trees. I'm really worried what your yard's going to look like when I get back, either really late tomorrow night or Monday morning. But they need to see that when you go out there and rake those leaves for somebody, or you do it for your own family, there's value in that. It's value to you. It's value to the people you served. It's value to a community. It's valuable to God because you've used the body He's given you and the mind He's giving you for something that's made a difference. The value is not just the $100 bill or the paycheck. There's a whole lot more value. And I want them to see that, but notice the wording, diligent work. I want my kids to do a job. That's hard to teach some kids. It's hard to teach a lot of kids, but there are some kids it is really hard to teach to do a job and do it well, to be diligent with it. But I want them to see that it's not just punching a clock. You are there to glorify God. That job or that service or whatever it is to be done to the glory of God. So you do it. You may not be the best at it, but you be the best you can be at it. Number 11. I want my children to know that a family somewhere is raising a little girl or a little boy that God has in mind for their future marriage. Really what that comes from is I want them to know that we're not alone. And you go, well, yeah, you go to church on Sunday. And I don't say this to try to tear the church apart or anything or talk bad about it. I love Central. I think it's, no offense, I think it's the greatest church in the world. Okay, I really do. But you know that there are families you go to church with that you love and you appreciate, but they don't do things exactly the same way you do. And that's okay to a certain extent. As long as it's biblical, that's all that matters. But there are families that have all kinds of different views about certain morality issues and things, and we may take a little stronger line about some things. And I want my kids to know there's a family out there somewhere who's raising a little girl, raising a little boy, or in our case now, it's a teenage boy, teenage girl, whatever, who you'll really appreciate how they raise them when you ask her to marry you or he asks you to marry him. Because you'll know, we may not agree on every last little detail, but we're going to be just fine. Because their mom and dad also really thought about moral issues the way we do. And they really do go to church and love church. And sometimes, I'll give some background to this in just a second. Sometimes you don't see that even in your local congregation. I wrote this list, this part of the list, during that time I was talking about before lunch that was a nightmare. And this one basically came because where we're at the time, I literally saw no one who I wanted either of my kids to marry one day. No one. Now, they may be now. Those kids may have matured. That's fine. But I wanted them to know that whether it's from this town or this state or somewhere way off somewhere else, somebody is raising a little boy or a little girl that's going to make you a great spouse. And you're going to agree on the most important things. Number 12. And this is one that's more for when they're a little bit older, but it's very important. I want my children to know that their bodies are a gift from God. That's a really hard one to teach because you have to be very careful how you talk about it. And I will say this, whether you have a boy or a girl, they both need to know that. You may think this is more for girls. They need to know that the use of their body, in whatever fashion it is, whether that's work-wise, exercise-wise, sexual-wise, anything else, is to be guided by the Word of God because their body is a gift from God. And again, that's one that probably is for them a little bit older, but those are some very important conversations. They bring in all kinds of things about, obviously, temptation, but also many, many other areas. Number 13. I want my children to know that home is a beautiful word. Notice I didn't just say my home, although I hope they think they think that's true. But one of these days, my home is not going to be their home probably, unless something happens, They're going to have their own home. But also, what is heaven? It's the home of the soul. I want them to love that word. That almost sounds like a Hallmark card. I know it's getting close to Christmas time, so you got what was it this year? 427 new Hallmark Christmas movies. I don't know. I actually saw the list the other day. I think it's 28 new Christmas movies this year. I'm like, how many different ways can a guy from New York win a girl from Indiana, as a logger? I mean, this is crazy. But anyway, but you have the snow globe. Anyway, I want them to know that wherever home is, that word should bring a calm and a peace and a serenity and a connection, and that makes them long for heaven more, because heaven is our home. And I want them to find the beauty in that word. 14. I want my children to know the value of honoring older people. I get furious when I see children, but really even more than that, teenagers, who not just disrespect older people, but who frankly just don't care, who act as if they don't exist. And I know that when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, for a lot of young people, it's quote unquote hard to interact meaningfully with someone who's 65 or 70 or 70, whatever. I get that to a point. But I want my children, whether they enjoy it or not, to show honor, to actually act as if those people are present. And if that person speaks to you, guess what? You better speak back. And it better not be while you're walking off. No. You stand there and have a 2-minute conversation. You look that person in the eye. If that old man whose hand is shaking reaches out to shake your hand, you shake his hand back. I really, really have drilled this into our kids because the Bible makes it clear that we are to care for and love and honor those who are older. I'm telling you, we sometimes look at the quote-unquote big sins of the world, and this is one we've forgotten to teach a generation or more. We need to make sure our kids know. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but you show respect, you show honor, simply because they are older. Number, 15. A very practical one. I want my children to know how to enjoy simple pleasures. I want my kids to learn, and some of this was practical. Didn't have to be the $10,000 vacation to enjoy it because we couldn't afford a $10,000 vacation. So some of it's very practical. But I really want them to see that it doesn't have to be anything fancy for you to find great pleasure in it. Go look at a waterfall and tell them, can you believe God created anything like this? How awesome is this? How sweet is the sound of that water rushing? Man, did you see that? The sun just came out from behind the cloud. Look at that. It made a rainbow right here in the waterfall. Teach them to look at those very simple, overlooked things. And here's the thing. When we raise kids who have that, they live far more contented lives. Because they love the big things. I'm not saying don't ever give them big things if you can do it. That's great. We went on a vacation a couple years in Washington, D.C. It cost more than I wanted to spend, I'll tell you. But we had a great time. We have almost as much fun going to a park and walk around and seeing the leaves in the fall. Because we teach them to appreciate the stuff that's right around them. It doesn't have to be $100 supper. It might be hot dogs in front of the TV. But I hate hot dogs, so not hot dogs, but a hamburger in front of the TV, watching our favorite TV show. Enjoy it. Teach them to love the simple pleasures. Number 16. I want to teach my children that both heaven and hell are real. That both of them are real. They're going to hear a lot in sermons and Bible classes and elsewhere about heaven and how you want to go there, of course. But I also want them to know that hell is real. It's not a made-up thing. It's not some myth just to scare you into heaven. I want them to know it's real. And again, those are hard conversations. You're talking to kids about, burning eternally. And that those are not real fun evenings. But you can balance it with the joy of heaven. You don't have to do, but I want to make sure they know both of those things are real. Number 17. I want my children to know how to serve without seeking the glory for themselves. In other words, you serve just to serve. You serve to glorify God, to help someone, to honor someone. If you get recognition, fine. That's wonderful. That's just icing on the cake. That's all it is. You do what's right because it's the right thing to do. You go, and when there's an announcement made at church, like we have every once in a while, we have a fellowship hall like you all do, and man, I feel like I move chairs in the fellowship all the time, but sometimes we've got to reset everything in there, and they'll say, hey, after services Wednesday night, we need some folks to go over. Shouldn't take more than about 10 minutes. We've got to reset the whole fellowship hall for this thing coming up. I want my kids to be the first ones out the door, not so they can take pictures and go, look what I'm doing tonight, but so the chairs get set up. Because those chairs need to be set up, and you have the physical ability to do it. Don't seek any glory for that. You just go serve. You're not going to get recognized very often, except in heaven, and that's all that matters. And I want to make sure they know that. 18. and you probably figured this would be on the list somewhere. I want my children to know the purity and the joy of the marriage bed. Notice how I worded that one. I thought about this one for a long time when I was trying to add something about the sexual relationship to my daddy list. Yes, I want my kids to know that things like premarital sex and things are wrong, of course. But as they've gotten older, I want to teach them that within marriage, Hebrews 13:4 is real. Marriage is to be held in honor, and the bed is undefiled. I want them to know that it's pure within marriage, and it's meant to be a joy within marriage. I'll be careful how I tell this story. I know we're live streaming and stuff, but I'll give you as many facts as I can. We did this one time as a family devotional. It was the talk kind of thing. We were trying to talk about Hebrews 13:4, and this is probably about 2 years ago, maybe 3. So our kids were probably something like 15 or 16 and 12 or 13, something like that. And our son is actually a very innocent kid. And I remember you could see in his face, it finally hit him what we were saying, that, yeah, mommy and daddy, that's still a thing, And finally, we just came out and said that, that mommy and daddy still do that. The only thing he could think to say was, for fun? Now, that's one of those times as a family devotion you're going, okay, how do I answer that question without making this a total train wreck of an evening? But what an innocent question. And really what a beautiful question. Because it gave an opportunity to say, well, yeah, but because that's where God placed it. That's why it's pleasurable. That's why it's a joy. But in the moment, it's like panic mode. But I wanted them to know, because here's the thing. We spend a lot of time in the church and in homes, rightly, telling people things about premarital sex is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And yes, we make sure we hammer that into people. But sometimes we do that so much so that then when they get married, frankly, they're scared of that relationship. I read a book not long ago, and there's a quote in it that the preacher who wrote the book said he had this happen. Someone he was counseling said that she really struggled with the sexual relationship, the first part of her marriage, and she said part of the reason was that all of these people at the church who've been telling her for all of her growing up years not to have sex were now cheering her on as she drove off to have sex. And she said she really struggled with that. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. We need to make sure we teach the balance. Yes, it's wrong outside of marriage, but there's a joy and a purity inside of marriage. And I want that to begin to develop in my kids before their wedding night, that they see that beauty of that relationship. Number 19. I want my children to know how to think through this world from a biblical worldview. How do I see, I'm not getting into specifics here because I know the time of year and stuff, but how do I see things like politics from a biblical worldview? How do I see things like economic issues from a biblical worldview? Not what this channel tells me, not what that podcaster tells me, not what this newspaper or website tells me. What does God tell me? And I want them, they may not come to the same conclusions I do, but I want them to be able to think through very complex, very real life, very nation-changing, world-changing events from a biblical worldview, and to think really deeply sometimes. Because let's be honest, in the world in which we live, some of the answers may not be completely black or white. And what's the nuance here? What's the full truth here? And number 20, I want my children to know that some of the most profound words, sorry, this is hard when you got a kid who just left home. Some of the most profound words they will ever say are, Jesus loves me, this I know. No matter how complex their life gets, no matter how easy or hard their life gets, I want them to know that those 6 words are some of the most profound they can ever say. Jesus loves me, this I know. Now, as I said, that's my list. I hope it triggers some thoughts for you as parents, grandparents, to say, yeah, I like that one. I don't like that one. That's similar to this one. It's meant to give you some juice. But then go back to that list every once in a while and say, you know what? We're not doing great on this. Let's work on it. Let's take a week of family Bible times and think about this. Or just randomly, I don't have a family devotional idea for tonight. It's number 8 night. Let's talk. That's fine. It's a great way to have that resource for you. I know you guys are tired of hearing me talk. Frankly, I'm tired of talking. But I hope we've given you some things today that have encouraged you. I hope we've given you, if nothing else, wind in the sails. Because in the culture in which we live, we are treated as the enemy. We're not the enemy. The enemy is the devil. He doesn't like what you guys are trying to do. But with the help of God, we can do it. I appreciate your attention throughout the day. I actually out-taught my wife. That's not normal. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Some resources for how to study the Bible. Some of it is self-taught. There's a book out there actually called How to Study the Bible. I forget the guy's name. I think it's Davis. It's actually a textbook that we used to kind of give some principles. One of the best ways to do that is to print out a very familiar text, maybe the 23rd Psalm, part of the Sermon on the Mount, etc., but print it with like triple and quadruple spacing. And I say this respectfully. Let your kids mess it up. Let them mark anything they can think of and then show them, wait a minute, what was Jesus talking about here? Oh, okay, why don't you circle this word and circle that word and draw a line? And that way they're messing up a piece of paper and not their own Bible. There have been nights where, for family devotional time, we've read a paragraph and I've just said, okay, what's he talking about? Oh, yeah, no. In this text, it's really self-taught. I did teach them to use Strong's Concordance, the numbering system. That's a great thing to do. I've taught them how to use Blue Letter Bible, how to search on there. But a lot of it's just making sure they know the general resources to use. But that book, How to Study the Bible, like I said, it's a textbook. But the first couple of chapters give you some exercises also that are really good to do. And so that's a good one to start with. It's deep. That would not be for like 8-year-olds. That's more for like 15 or 16-year-olds, but it's really good. Yep. Anybody else? All right. Thank you all very much for your attention throughout the day. You can go watch football.